Hey, welcome to the Parsonage and Budget Calculator. This is going to be just a little quick tutorial on how everything works. So take a few minutes and check it out. So on your screen right now, you see the first tab in the overall budget spreadsheet. You're going to see a number of different things here, which I'll break down in brief. On the top left, you see your budget summary with your start and end balance for the month. You see the year, you see your starting balance, and pretty much as we go through this, you'll want to keep in mind that if it is in this kind of tan peach color, you can edit it. If it's in gray, for the most part, you might not want to edit it, but for January, there is some setup involved. So let's go right ahead. Let's suppose that we start out, we'll just start with a zero balance, but if you were carrying over from a previous year or you have savings, you could put that in there and it would update your totals. But let's say that we want to suggest that we have a paycheck planned of $4,000 a month. So what we would do then is we put that in. We could put in other income source names here. We could also select different categories here. You can replace any of these fields with whatever you want to put in. And then under credit cards, you can add different credit card titles as well. But for the sake of this example, we're going to just fill out some numbers here that will hopefully add up to just about our $4,000 budget. So I'm just going to go through, plug these all in. We are going to plan for savings of $500, as you see there. We're a little bit over, so we will obviously, you would have to rebalance the budget a bit, but let's say we'll just cut down on, just for argument's sake, we'll say rent is $800. Okay, so we're within our budget now. It doesn't matter if it's exactly $0 because it's going to make a difference to your bottom line eventually anyway. So here we are budgeting for everything that we have here. Now we need to go ahead and begin to enter actual transactions. So this is both a budget calculator and a parsonage calculator. So we're going to be looking at how this applies in both regards. So down here, you see that we have a parsonage record. We'll start with that. Each of these has a drop down of different categories that have been summarized pretty much from the IRS and other sources that interpret the IRS. And so you can choose basically what it is that you are wanting to account for. So you might say that you're going to have your rent or mortgage, electricity, water, sewer, etc., etc. These are actually populated by the Parsonage tab. If you go over to Parsonage, anything you put in these fields here are what are going to constitute the drop downs that you see in the monthly tabs. So this is crucial because it may be that where you are, you don't want to include rent. Maybe you just want mortgage. So you could just replace this with the word mortgage and you'd be good to go. Or vice versa, of course. So you have those options here. But now what we want to do is we want to begin to put in some transactions. So I have some here that I have thrown in together. I've collected these just as hypotheticals, but what you can do, something that makes it super easy for me, is I have a mint.com account, and there's many services like this where you just connect all your banking info in one place, and you can export a spreadsheet basically of all of your charges. Now you could go into any of your banks and you could do this one by one, where you're just exporting a CSV file or a spreadsheet of your charges for the month. But I found that by far the most accurate and easiest is to just use a service like Mint, where you just have everything connected, you have one comprehensive spreadsheet, and you're able to pretty much just paste everything in here. I typically do this in two phases. There's a worksheet section where I will usually arrange the columns that I'm getting from Mint as titled here, and then I'll just paste them all in. That works really well for me. I have this particular tab set up so that if it notices any transactions that have been duplicated, for example, it'll alert me. I'm not going to go through that just for the sake of time, but if you were to paste in all your transactions here and begin copying them over into the transactions tab, it would show you if you had missed any in that process. Most people won't use that, but I've found it quite helpful. You'll notice here that you have multiple columns. You have your amount column, description, account, type. This comes directly out of Mint as well, but you would set it as well either way if it's a debit or credit. You would then set your categories, which I'm just going to throw in here real quick. So let's say these are the categories that I've picked. By the way, these categories come directly from the January tab. So anything in these boxes here are exactly going to be what decides what is in the transactions tab. So all these drop downs are governed directly from that. And of course the parsonage drop downs are governed from the parsonage tab. So here I've thrown some things in here. I've got rent. You'll notice I've got rent for 2 different months. You'll notice it goes yellow. This indicates that there's a duplication in the total. That's okay. That's just meant to be a redundancy in case you accidentally were to copy something in twice. But in this case, it's not an error. And then, of course, it also highlights payments so that you can make sure you included both the credit and debit when you paid the card and when the money came out of your bank. So this is just a great little example here. Now, one thing I want to point out is that I have a birthday gift here. So I've listed this as gift income. And if we go back to January, we're going to see that this would show up in the gift income. We'd have our actual income. Now, I'm not budgeting for gift income because that's going to be uncertain, and you don't want to budget on an uncertain income. But what is interesting is that because my income is now 4,120, the tithe cell over here has gone red. This is what happens when you under budget for what you're going to be giving as your tithe. So if I were to say 500 here, it would go back to the regular color. So that's just an option there. It'll highlight and let you know if you slightly under budgeted or if something was a little bit under when it comes to tithe and offering. But for the most part, you're going to want to keep these static for January, because here's the thing. As you go to February, March, etc., all the rest of the months, these pull directly from the January tab. Now, this doesn't have to be the case. You can override these at any time in any month if you want to adjust your budget. But I just set it that way so that it gives me kind of a head start as I come to each month. If I want to keep it the same, I can. I mean, for the most part, my phone and internet charges don't really change. But if I want to modify things, I can. So, for example, let's say, my spending money is going to be a little bit more. Let's say I budget a little bit more. I might just say January plus 50 or something if I got a gift of $50, and that will add to my bottom line for this particular month. But in any event, that is how the budget section works. Now let's talk parsonage, because this is probably the reason that you're looking at this. How does the parsonage work? Well, the moment I took the transaction and I applied something as parsonage, we have 3 here, 2 rent and 1 electricity, it immediately shows up in the appropriate category. Now, if I didn't have that category listed, it wouldn't show up. So if I only had like water and sewer here, it wouldn't show up. But because I have rent and mortgage set and I have pretty much the core categories I'm going to use for the year showing in here, it's going to immediately show up the actual amount. Now, let's suppose that my rent is only 800. I can override that. And I could say, look, 100 of that is water and sewer, and let's say 100 is trash. You want to make sure your bottom line remains the same, but you can do a little quick override if you need to split up maybe a rental charge that actually goes to more than one thing, which is the case where I live with my apartment complex. They charge a single fee, but it actually breaks down into multiple things. So here you see you've now categorized it. Now, when you get to the end of the year or the end of the month, if you go to the Parsonage tab, you are going to see that it's immediately populated 800, and then it has populated your electricity, it's populated your water, and that should match these numbers here. So there's our electricity, which is 110 in our transactions, water, sewer, trash, etc. Everything is going to match identically in this breakdown. Now, if you want, there's also a plus minus button that you can click on. This is probably going to give me a warning. Yes. Anytime you do something you're not supposed to, it will give you a little warning and let you know that you might accidentally change something you shouldn't. But in the case of these little plus minus buttons, those don't actually change anything. That's just a different view of the grouping of columns. So this is just a quick little way to collapse and get your totals for the year, or you can go back to the monthly view and you can see what your breakdown is per month. So that's really the overview of how this works. This is just a super convenient way to month by month throw in all your transactions using maybe a service like Mint to export. categorizing them briefly, and then from there, everything else pretty much gets calculated. You might have to do a little bit further breakdowns with Parsonage if you have unique situations like mine. But by and large, everything's going to calculate automatically throughout the year, and that's going to make life easier for you. Just a couple other things. The totals for the month do not calculate out of the credit card section. So I've got a little note on that here. Cells from 49, row 49 down are not calculated as part of your bottom line for the month. That is because if you get a reimbursement and you spend some money that's going to be reimbursed and you categorize it as such, obviously that's not going to change the amount of money in your bank by the time you're reimbursed. So reimbursements, to be reimbursed on the expense line and reimbursements on the income line, those are not calculated as part of your income or money going out. But savings, on the other hand, savings do count as part of your actual, not as an expense, so to speak, in the sense that you're losing money, but it does count so that you can have a rolling tally of how much you have saved throughout the year. One other thing, investments, I have them above this line here, and this counts as a true expense. So this is going to look like money you've spent. I assume that probably any investment accounts you may have is not really being calculated in your bank savings, and so I've gone ahead and thrown that in here. If you wanted, you could probably move things around a bit, but I've just done that for my own purposes because I don't really want to count my investments as part of my bottom line, in the same sense that I realize that, it's still my money, but I'm not going to have access to it until, I'm like 65. So that's what I do there with that. Just a couple last things. If you go to the end of the tabs here at the bottom, you'll notice there are some additional tabs. We have a reimbursements tab, and this will tell you how much you said was to be reimbursed versus actually reimbursed. This has helped me a lot to find discrepancies in whether or not maybe I forgot to request a reimbursement or money didn't come in. So this is quite helpful here. Often, of course, you'll sometimes get something that's going to be reimbursed and the next month will come by and it may not match up. Like January, you paid for the art, in February you were reimbursed. So that doesn't always match up, but the annual total should by and large match up. So that's been helpful to me. Then there's also an expense total, which will give you your grand totals for the year in every category of your general expenses. There's also an income total, which will tell you the income totals for all of your income sources. And obviously these names here will change if you actually title them in the January tab, since that's what governs the names for all the tabs. But right at the end, you'll come to a summary sheet. This is helpful. You shouldn't edit anything here, but this will give you your totals for the year overall. It'll give you some charts. This whole template is taken from originally from a Google budgeting template, so you might have seen something similar before, but I've just modified it so extensively that there's a lot that's a little bit new. So this will just give you your net savings, your beginning, ending balances for the month, and you can pretty much see the trends over time. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. I hope that for those of you who are pastors or clergy and trying to figure out your parsonage, that this would make life a little bit easier. Yes, it will require a little bit of work tracking your spending, but I think this is always a good practice and it can be truly quite helpful. So I hope this has been of use to you, and I hope that as you go through this and give it a spin, that it is something that makes life easier. So have a stab at it and enjoy.